This is my true story. I gave my son everything I had, my time, my strength, and the years of my life that can never return. I believed he would carry my name with pride, that he would one day look at me not with judgment, but with gratitude. But instead, I faced a cruelty I never expected. One evening, in front of his wife, he laughed and called me an old dog. The shame cut through me like a knife. But what he didn't know was that I carried a secret that could destroy him. Before I tell you what I did, let me know where you're watching from, and please subscribe if you feel ever been humiliated before. A father's devotion is not measured in words, but in the silent sacrifices he makes when no one is looking. From the moment my son was born, my life became less about me and more about him. I worked sleepless nights, sometimes holding 2 shifts back to back, because his needs always came before mine. There were nights I went to bed hungry so he could eat. Days I wore the same old shoes so he could have new ones for school. Mornings I dragged my tired body to work after only an hour's rest because the bills had to be paid. Every drop of sweat, every ache in my bones, every line carved into my face was proof of the love I had for him. I believed my duty as a father was not just to raise him, but to shield him from the harshness of the world, to give him a foundation solid enough that he could build his own life without the struggles that had weighed me down. I paid for his education in full, even when it meant taking loans and sacrificing my own comfort. I still remember the nights I sat at the kitchen table, balancing numbers that never seemed to add up, but somehow making it work because my son's future mattered more than my present. When he graduated, I stood in the crowd with tears in my eyes, proud not of myself, but of him. I thought my sacrifices had been worth it, that my devotion had borne fruit. I believed he would carry my name with dignity, that he would look at me and see not just a father, but the man who gave him everything. When he fell in love and decided to marry, I opened my arms to his wife as if she were my own daughter. I helped pay for the wedding, even dipping into the savings I had guarded for my old age. I wanted him to have a beautiful start to his married life, to stand tall and proud in front of family and friends. After the wedding, I helped secure the house they live in today. The down payment, the paperwork, the sleepless nights planning, all of it came from me. I handed him not just a roof, but the stability I had dreamed of giving since the day he was born. Through all of this, I never asked for anything in return. Not money, not favors. All I expected was respect, a little kindness, and the recognition that the life he enjoyed was not born out of luck, but out of his father's endless sacrifices. I thought he would see me as his foundation, the man who gave him his chance to succeed. I thought he would be proud to call me his father, to walk with me in public, to share meals with me at home, to listen when I spoke. But as the years passed, I noticed something shift. The gratitude I had once seen in his eyes began to fade. Where there should have been respect, there was indifference. Where there should have been kindness, there was dismissal. Still, I held on to hope, telling myself he was simply stressed, that life had made him forget for a while. I convinced myself that deep down, my devotion still mattered to him. I wanted to believe that all those years of sleepless nights, of sacrifices made in silence, had not been wasted. A father's devotion is not about glory or applause. It is about love so deep it expects nothing but respect in return. And in my final years, all I wanted was that respect, to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as the man who gave everything so his son could have everything. But as I would soon learn, the devotion I carried in my heart was not mirrored in his. Instead, it became a burden to him, a weight he no longer wanted to carry, a reminder of a debt he never intended to repay. And that, more than anything, would become the wound that cut the deepest. The cracks in our bond did not appear overnight. They began as faint lines, small enough to ignore, easy enough to excuse. At first, it was in his tone, sharp where it used to be soft, impatient where it used to be kind. When I spoke, he would sigh as if my words were a weight on his shoulders. He no longer listened with the respect a son should give his father. Instead, he brushed me off with quick answers, or worse, silence. I told myself it was stress, the pressures of work, the strain of married life. I convinced myself that my son still respected me, that the dismissiveness was only temporary. But deep down, I felt it. The slow erosion of love and gratitude replaced by arrogance. I began to notice how he avoided me in his own home. Meals that were once shared as a family now became moments where he and his wife would sit together, while I ate quietly at the far end of the table. He no longer asked how I was feeling, no longer cared if I had eaten, no longer treated me as part of the household. Instead, I felt like a stranger in the very house my hands had helped secure for him. Each time I tried to join the conversation, he would cut me off or roll his eyes, making it clear that my voice no longer mattered. Even small gestures turned sour. If I asked him for help carrying something heavy, he would scoff and say I was too old to be useful. If I forgot something, he would mock my memory instead of offering patience. If I made a suggestion, he dismissed it as outdated. Slowly, I stopped speaking as much, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was tired of being silenced. A father who had given his life for his son now felt like a burden in his presence. The arrogance grew bolder with time. He began speaking to me not as a son to a father, but as a man to an inconvenience. Sometimes, in front of his wife, he would make jokes at my expense, laughing about my age, my slowness, my fading strength. She would laugh nervously, unsure whether to join in or stay quiet, but her silence was enough to deepen the humiliation. My son was proud of these moments, proud to show his wife that he no longer saw me as someone to admire, but as someone to mock. I tried to reason with myself, telling my heart not to break. I reminded myself of the countless sacrifices I had made for him. I told myself that beneath the arrogance, he was still my son, still the boy whose hand I had held across busy streets, whose tears I had wiped away after scraped knees, whose future I had built with my own 2 hands. But those memories began to feel like they belonged to someone else's life. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who no longer valued the father who had raised him. The love I carried for him remained, but the bond of respect was crumbling. It was not one cruel act that destroyed it, but the slow accumulation of small humiliations, the dismissive tones, the cold silences, the mocking jokes. Each one was a brick pulled from the foundation of our relationship. And though I tried to patch the cracks with patience, the wall was weakening, ready to collapse. It is one thing to grow old in silence, but it is another to grow old in the presence of a child who no longer respects you. That was the truth I faced. I had become a burden in the eyes of my own flesh and blood. And though my devotion to him never faltered, his respect for me had vanished, replaced with something crueler than indifference. Mockery. Humiliation, when it comes from strangers, stings for a moment. But when it comes from your own blood, it burns into the soul and lingers forever. The night it happened, I still remember every detail. The flicker of the dining room light, the faint clatter of dishes, the way the air felt heavy with unspoken words. We were gathered at the table, my son, his wife, and me. Dinner should have been a moment of family, a reminder of togetherness. Instead, it became the stage for my greatest shame. The conversation had been light at first, mostly between him and his wife. I tried to join in, offering a memory from the past, a story of the struggles I endured to give him the life he now enjoyed. My words barely left my lips when he smirked, leaned back in his chair, and delivered the sentence that shattered me. "You're nothing but an old dog now." For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. His wife shifted uncomfortably, a nervous laugh escaping her lips as though she didn't know whether to defend me or join in his cruelty. My son's eyes, however, held no hesitation. They sparkled with arrogance, with the pride of a man who believed he had reduced his father to nothing more than a relic. The insult cut deeper than any wound I had ever carried. I had been called many things in life by enemies, by strangers, even by those who envied me. But to be called an old dog by the very son I had raised, fed, clothed, educated, and married off, that was beyond pain. It stripped me not just of dignity, but of identity. In that moment, I was not his father, not the man who had built his foundation, not the provider who had given him everything. I was, in his eyes, nothing. Less than a man. something to be laughed at, dismissed, discarded. I sat frozen, my fork heavy in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. My face burned, but not from anger, from shame. Shame that my son saw me as a burden, shame that his wife witnessed my humiliation, shame that the years of sacrifice I had poured into him meant so little. Around us, the meal sat untouched, but the taste of food no longer mattered. The only taste in my mouth was the bitterness of betrayal. I looked at his wife, hoping she might say something, hoping she might remind him of respect. But she stayed silent, her gaze lowered, unwilling to intervene. And in that silence, my humiliation deepened. It wasn't just my son's insult that broke me. It was the world's quiet agreement, the suggestion that perhaps he was right, that perhaps I was nothing more than an old dog. But inside, something shifted. The humiliation hurt, yes, but it also awakened something that had long been sleeping. I had carried secrets for years, buried truths I had protected to preserve his marriage, his reputation, his pride. And now, as I sat there stripped of dignity, I realized the irony. He thought he had reduced me to nothing, but in my silence, I still held the power to destroy him. The meal ended in awkwardness, but the words remained etched in my heart. Long after the plates were cleared, long after the lights dimmed, long after the house fell silent, I lay awake, replaying the moment again and again, the smirk on his face, the laughter in his wife's throat, the fire in my chest. He had humiliated me in front of her, but what he didn't know was that I carried proof of his own betrayal, proof that would one day turn his arrogance into ashes. That night was the breaking point. The humiliation he gave me was the spark that lit the fire of my resolve. If he wanted to call me a dog, then I would show his wife the wolf he truly was. That night, after the sting of his words had settled into silence, I found myself sitting alone in the dark. The house was quiet, but my heart was not. I stared at the faint shadows on the wall, listening to the echoes of his voice in my mind. "You're nothing but an old dog now." No matter how many times I tried to push the words away, they returned, louder, sharper, cutting into me with every repetition. I had faced hardship before. I had endured poverty, pain, and even betrayal from strangers, but nothing compared to the weight of those words spoken by my own son. I thought back to the early years, when he was still a boy, fragile and innocent, when his tiny hand clutched mine as we crossed busy streets, when his tears soaked my shirt after scraped knees or nightmares. I thought about the nights I skipped meals so he could eat, the mornings I walked to work on tired legs so he could have bus fare for school, the winters when my coat grew thin but I made sure his was warm. All the sacrifices that had cost me pieces of my life, all the silent choices I had made so his life would shine brighter than mine, all of it weighed heavy on me that night. And now, all of it seemed forgotten, erased by one cruel sentence that reduced me to less than human. Tears filled my eyes, but I did not wipe them away. I let them fall freely, each one carrying the weight of a memory, each one soaking into the years of sacrifice. It was not weakness that brought them, but grief. Grief for the love I had poured out, grief for the bond I thought unbreakable, grief for the respect that had withered into mockery. To be seen as a burden by strangers would have hurt, but to be seen as a burden by the very son I raised was a wound that pierced deeper than bone. I sat there asking myself questions I had no answers for. Where had I gone wrong? Had I loved him too much, given him too much, shielded him too often? Had my sacrifices turned into entitlement in his eyes, teaching him not gratitude but arrogance? I wanted to believe he still loved me, that his words had been careless, but the smirk on his face, the silence of his wife, told me otherwise. It wasn't a mistake. It was how he truly saw me. For hours I stayed in that chair, replaying the past like an old film. The birthdays I worked extra hours to afford, the wedding I helped pay for, the down payment on the house I gave him so he could stand tall among his peers. I remembered the pride I once felt watching him succeed, believing that my sacrifices had been worth it. But that pride had turned to ash, leaving only the bitter truth. He did not see me as a father anymore. He saw me as a burden. Yet in the quiet of that night, between the tears and the memories, a spark of strength flickered. Because though he had mocked me, though he had humiliated me, though he had reduced me to an old dog, I knew something he didn't. I carried a truth he had hidden, a secret he thought was buried. For years, I had held on to evidence of his betrayal. Photographs, messages, proof of his affair with his wife's stepsister. I had kept them locked away, not out of fear, but out of protection, thinking I was shielding his marriage, his reputation, his future. But as I sat there in the dark, humiliated and broken, I realized that silence was no longer loyalty. Silence had turned me into his victim, and I promised myself that night that if he saw me as a dog, then I would show his wife the wolf he truly was. Every man carries secrets, but some are heavier than others. For years, I had carried one that could have shattered my son's life in an instant. It was not suspicion, not whispers, not rumors. It was proof, cold and undeniable. Proof I had stumbled upon by accident. Proof I chose to bury in silence. I had discovered, long before that cruel dinner, that my son was having an affair with his wife's stepsister. It started with messages, ones I found when he carelessly left his phone on the table while stepping away. At first, I thought my eyes deceived me. The words seemed too bold, too intimate, to be anything other than fantasy. But as I scrolled, my heart sank. There were confessions of love, promises made in secrecy, words exchanged that no married man should write to another woman, especially not one tied so closely to his wife. I should have stopped there, should have confronted him immediately, but I didn't. Something inside me told me to wait, to see the truth in full. Weeks later, the truth came crashing down. I saw them together. Not by chance, not by rumor, but with my own eyes. I had been walking home, and as I passed near a quiet cafe tucked away from the main street, I saw them seated close, his hand over hers, their eyes locked in a way that spoke volumes. I froze, watching from a distance, rage and grief warring inside me. My son, my flesh and blood, was betraying the woman who trusted him, the woman I had welcomed into my family. In that moment, I wanted to march in, to drag him out, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away, carrying the secret in silence. Over time, I gathered more proof, photos, receipts, little fragments of truth that painted a picture darker than any father should have to see. I locked them away, hidden in a drawer only I knew about, telling myself I was protecting him. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe he would end it, maybe he would remember his vows, maybe he would return to his wife with repentance. But months turned into years, and nothing changed. If anything, the affair grew stronger. I saw the signs in his stepsister-in-law's behavior too. The lingering glances, the excuses to visit, the way she avoided her sister's eyes. They thought they were clever, but their arrogance blinded them. I knew everything, and yet I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it wasn't my secret to expose. Above all, I told myself I was shielding his wife, sparing her the heartbreak of knowing the truth. But the real reason was simpler: loyalty. Blind, foolish loyalty. I loved my son too much to destroy him, even when he was destroying himself. I chose silence because I believed silence was love. I carried his secret because I thought protecting him was my duty, even when he no longer respected me as his father. Yet that loyalty came at a cost. I carried the weight of his betrayal in my chest, unable to look his wife in the eyes without guilt, unable to sit at family gatherings without feeling the poison in the air. I lived with the knowledge that my son was not the man his wife thought he was, not the man I had raised him to be. Still, I endured, waiting, hoping, silently praying he would change. And then came the night he mocked me, the night he called me an old dog in front of his wife. That was the moment everything shifted. His insult unlocked something inside me that silence could no longer contain. For years I had protected him from exposure, from disgrace, from losing the marriage he did not deserve. But when he humiliated me, when he stripped me of dignity, I realized the truth. I had been protecting a man who did not even respect his own father. The secret I carried was no longer a burden I would bear for his sake. It was a weapon, sharp and undeniable, and I knew exactly when and how to use it. The night after he humiliated me, I sat in my room with the drawer open, the hidden envelope of photographs and evidence resting in my hands. For years, that envelope had been nothing but a weight, a reminder of betrayal I chose not to expose. I had carried it like a stone in my pocket, convincing myself that silence was protection, that shielding him from the truth was a father's duty. But as I stared at it now, the memory of his words, "You're nothing but an old dog now," burned hotter than ever. I realized then that my silence had not been love. It had been weakness, and he had taken advantage of it. I replayed the years of sacrifice in my mind, the endless nights I had worked for him, the life I had given him, the loyalty I had shown even when he did not deserve it. And what had he given me in return? Humiliation, mockery, disrespect so deep it cut into the very core of who I was as a father. He had not just insulted me, he had erased me in front of his wife, reducing me to nothing. That was the moment my patience ended. I knew then that my revenge would not come in anger or in violence. It would not come in shouting matches or fists slammed against tables. No, my revenge would be sharp, clean, and undeniable. I would use the very truth he had buried, the secret I had carried for him, and I would place it in the hands of the one person who deserved to know, his wife. The decision did not come without hesitation. A part of me, the father still clinging to the hope of reconciliation, whispered that I could stay silent a little longer. That maybe he would change. Maybe he would remember respect before it was too late. But that part of me was small now, drowned out by the pain of his insult. If he could strip me of dignity so easily, then why should I protect his? If he could humiliate me in front of his wife, then why should I shield him from humiliation in front of her? I opened the envelope, spreading the contents across the table. There were photographs of him with her stepsister, their intimacy undeniable. There were receipts from secret meetings, hotel stays, dinners that no husband should have shared with another woman. There were printed copies of the messages I had once found, words so damning they could not be explained away. Each piece was a nail, and together they formed the coffin of his lies. Looking at them, I felt both sorrow and resolve. Sorrow because no father should have to destroy his own son. Resolve because my son was no longer the boy I had raised. He was a man who had lost his way, a man who mocked the very person who had given him everything. He had become a stranger to me, and strangers do not deserve protection. I placed everything back into the envelope, sealing it carefully. In that moment, I felt a strange calm. The decision had been made, and with it, the weight of years of silence lifted from my shoulders. Tomorrow, I told myself, his wife would see the truth. Tomorrow, the man who called me a dog would face his own reflection. Tomorrow, the world he built on lies would come crashing down. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. Not because I had forgotten the pain, but because I had finally chosen to act. The decision had been made. The truth would speak, and I would no longer be silent. The day I chose to reveal the truth began like any other, yet it carried a weight I could feel in every breath. I woke with purpose, the envelope of evidence resting on my desk like a loaded weapon. For years it had been hidden, its sharp edges dulled by my silence. But now it was alive, charged with the power to end lies and shatter arrogance. As I held it in my hands, I thought about the moment at the dinner table when my son reduced me to an old dog. That insult had not only cut me, it had awakened me. Today, he would taste humiliation far worse than mine. I waited until the afternoon, when the house was quiet. His wife was in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, planting flowers with the same care she had once poured into her marriage. She looked peaceful, unaware of the storm that was about to break. For a moment, guilt tugged at me. She was innocent in all of this, a woman who had trusted her husband, who had welcomed me as family. To hand her the envelope meant shattering her world. But then I remembered her silence at the dinner table, the way she had laughed nervously as my son mocked me. She had watched my humiliation without a word of defense, and I knew she deserved to see the truth, not because she had hurt me, but because she had been living in a lie. I walked toward her slowly, the envelope tucked under my arm. She looked up, surprised to see me approach with such intensity in my eyes. Before she could speak, I extended the envelope. My voice was steady, stripped of emotion, as I said the only words she needed to hear. He called me a dog. But here is what he really is. Her hands trembled as she took it, confusion spreading across her face. She opened the envelope, and the silence of the garden was broken by the sound of paper rustling. One by one, she pulled out the photographs, the receipts, the printed messages. I watched her expression shift from confusion to shock, from shock to disbelief, and finally to the raw wound of betrayal. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears as the evidence stacked against her husband, undeniable and merciless. I did not stay to watch her break completely. That was not my role, and I had no desire to linger in her pain. I had delivered the truth, and that was enough. I turned and walked away, my footsteps heavy but certain. Behind me, I could hear her sobs, the kind that come from a heart split in two. And though it hurt me to leave her like that, I knew this was justice. She had laughed when I was humiliated, but now she understood what true humiliation felt like. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I had not shouted, I had not cursed, I had not raised my hand. I had simply revealed the truth. And in that simplicity lay its power. My son thought he had stripped me of dignity, but now it was his dignity that lay in ruins. The wolf hiding beneath his skin had been exposed, not by rage, but by silence and proof. That night, I did not wait for the chaos that would follow. I did not need to. I already knew the storm had begun, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout came swiftly, like a storm that had been waiting just beyond the horizon. That evening, the house that once echoed with quiet meals and shallow conversations erupted in chaos. His wife confronted him the moment he returned home, the envelope clutched in her hands like a dagger. I was not there to witness the explosion firsthand, but later I heard the details from neighbors, from relatives, from the whispers that spread faster than fire through dry grass. And in my mind, I could see it all: the confrontation, the fury, the unraveling of his carefully constructed lies. She had laid the photographs out on the table before him, each one a piece of his betrayal frozen in time. She demanded answers, her voice sharp with pain, trembling with rage. At first he denied it, as liars always do. He claimed the pictures were old, that they were doctored, that someone was out to ruin him. But denial cannot erase truth, and the evidence was overwhelming. Every photo, every receipt, every message pulled from the envelope was a stone in the avalanche that buried him. As the argument grew louder, neighbors passing by heard her cries. Some said she screamed his name with fury, others said her voice broke with despair. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the walls. A plate, a cup, perhaps thrown in anger. He tried to defend himself, but the more he spoke, the deeper he dug. Lies crumbled into half-truths collapsed into silence, and silence turned into desperation. He had been exposed, not by strangers, but by his own father. His arrogance dissolved. The man who once called me an old dog now stood in front of his wife with his pride in ashes. She wept, not just for the betrayal of his affair, but for the years she had spent loving a man who mocked loyalty and spat on trust. She cried for herself, for the life she thought she had, for the family she thought she built. And though my heart ached for her pain, I could not feel pity for him. This was justice. This was balance. By the next day, word had spread beyond the walls of the house. Relatives who once admired him began to whisper behind his back. Friends who once envied his marriage now looked at him with disgust. His wife's family turned cold, their eyes burning with fury at the humiliation he had inflicted. The stepsister, caught in the center of it all, tried to disappear into silence. But the truth had already painted her name in disgrace. Everywhere my son turned, he was met with glares, with whispers, with the sharp sting of shame. The fallout consumed more than his marriage. It consumed his reputation. At work, colleagues who once respected him began to question his integrity. In the community, people who once greeted him warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. He became a man marked not by success or pride, but by betrayal. And every whisper, every stare, every door that closed on him was a reminder of the night he had humiliated his father and the justice that followed. As for me, I stayed silent. I did not boast, I did not gloat. I simply lived my days with quiet dignity, knowing the truth had spoken louder than any words I could ever say. My son had thought he could strip me of pride, but in the end, it was his pride that was stripped, his lies that were exposed, his life that was left in ruins. The fallout was not just his to bear, it was hers too. His wife, the woman who had once laughed nervously when he mocked me. She now carried the weight of betrayal, the knowledge that the man she trusted had destroyed her faith. But unlike him, she was innocent. She had been deceived, not deceiving. And though I pitied her pain, I knew she would rise again, stronger without him. The house that once held their laughter now held only silence and broken trust, and in that silence, justice had done its work. The aftermath of truth is never neat. It leaves broken pieces scattered across the lives it touches, and no matter how much someone tries to sweep them away, the cracks remain. After the night of revelation, my son's world began to crumble piece by piece, each day bringing fresh reminders of what he had lost. His wife, once his partner, his confidant, his shield, refused to look at him the same way again. She moved through the house like a shadow, speaking only when necessary, her eyes red from nights spent crying. Within a week, she packed her bags, her silence louder than any farewell, and walked out of his life. She did not shout, she did not curse, she simply left, leaving behind a man drowning in the mess he created. The family gathered in whispers, their voices carrying judgment sharper than knives. Cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone had an opinion, and none of them spared him. Some said he had disgraced not just his wife but the entire family name. Others said he had spat on the sacrifices I had made, that he had bitten the very hand that raised him. For the first time, he felt the sting of isolation, the coldness of being shunned by those who once celebrated him. Invitations to family dinners stopped arriving, old friends stopped calling, and the community that once respected him turned their backs. Professionally, the damage followed him like a shadow. Whispers of his betrayal leaked into his workplace, staining his reputation. His colleagues looked at him differently, their respect replaced by suspicion. Promotions he once expected vanished. Opportunities slipped through his fingers, and every meeting carried the silent weight of judgment. He had built his image on the illusion of integrity, but once the mask was torn away, there was nothing left to hold on to. As for the stepsister, her life was no less shattered. She became the subject of scorn within her own family. The betrayal of a sister is not easily forgiven, and her name became a stain whispered in hallways, spoken in disgust at gatherings. She tried to hide, to disappear, but betrayal has a way of following you no matter where you go. Her family disowned her, her friends avoided her, and the life she once lived dissolved into shame. And through it all, my son, the same man who once looked at me with arrogance, who dared to call me an old dog, now carried himself like a ghost. His pride was gone, his marriage destroyed, his reputation in ruins. He walked with slumped shoulders, avoiding eyes, speaking little. The man who once mocked me in front of his wife now could not bear to face her, nor anyone else. He had been reduced not by my hands, but by his own actions, exposed by the truth he thought would never come to light. For me, the aftermath was quieter, steadier. I did not revel in his downfall, though part of me felt the satisfaction of justice served. I lived my days in peace, no longer carrying the burden of his secrets. For years, I had protected him, and for that loyalty, I was humiliated. But now, the silence I carried was gone, replaced by dignity. I could walk through the village with my head high, not because I destroyed him, but because I revealed the truth. The truth had done the work for me. I often thought about his wife, the young woman who once sat at our table, laughing, believing in a marriage built on lies. I pitied her, for she had suffered the deepest wound, betrayal from both husband and family. Yet I also admired her strength. She left, choosing dignity over despair, and I knew she would rebuild her life on firmer ground than the one my son had given her. In some way, I hoped my act of revealing the truth would free her, even if it hurt her at first. The aftermath was not just about ruin, it was about clarity. My son learned that arrogance without respect leads only to downfall. His wife learned that lies, no matter how carefully hidden, always surface. And I learned that silence, though it feels like protection, can turn into chains. By breaking mine, I regained myself. Justice for me did not arrive with thunder or fire. It came in silence, in the steady hand that delivered truth to the right eyes at the right moment. My son had mocked me, stripped me of dignity, reduced me to an old dog in front of his wife. But in the end, it was not my words that destroyed him. It was his own actions, his own betrayal, revealed in the proof I had carried for years. Justice was not loud, but it was final. As I sat in my chair in the evenings after everything unfolded, I felt a peace I had not known for years. I no longer carried the weight of his secret, no longer felt the guilt of protecting a man who did not respect me. For too long, I had silenced myself, believing loyalty meant shielding him even from the truth. But loyalty without respect is slavery, and that night at the dinner table had shown me exactly how little he valued me. By exposing him, I reclaimed my dignity. I did not gloat, I did not boast, I simply lived. I ate meals with calmness, walked with my head higher than before, and slept without the heaviness of betrayal pressing on my chest. For the first time in years, my nights were not filled with restless questions about where I had gone wrong. Instead, they were filled with the steady truth that I had acted with justice. I had not destroyed him. I had allowed him to destroy himself by letting the truth see daylight. My son was left to live with the consequences of his arrogance. He had lost his wife, the woman who once stood by his side. He had lost his reputation, the respect of his peers, the warmth of his relatives. He had lost the illusion of power he once held over me. Every whisper in the community, every cold stare, every door closed in his face reminded him that betrayal has a price, and that price is always paid in full. His wife, though broken, found her strength. She cut ties with him and rebuilt her life. In my heart, I hoped she would one day find happiness, for she had suffered a pain she did not deserve. As for her stepsister, the affair partner, she was left in ruins too. The shame of betraying her own family followed her everywhere. Together, they had tried to build a secret world of desire, but it collapsed under the weight of truth. And me, the old man, the father, the so-called dog, I was the one who walked away with dignity. My justice was not in watching him fall, but in knowing I had chosen the truth when silence had failed me. My justice was in reminding him that a father is not to be mocked, that the same man who gave everything can also take away everything with a single choice. Final thought. He called me an old dog. But I showed her the wolf he truly was. In the end, he lost everything, and I regained my dignity.